Everlasting Lucifer, Episode 1, Chapter 1, An Intelligent Filament. Vade sat at the bar in the busy executive lounge and sipped his peppermint tea. With a sigh, a slender girl appeared. She dropped her satchel on the bar and followed it with a canvas bag, a book, 4 magazines, a glass of champagne, and a plate holding girl-sized amounts of salad, salmon, cheese, and chocolate pudding. She sat down, sighed again, crossed her legs, and took off her hat to shake out long black hair. What was she wearing? Some sort of jumpsuit? She smiled at the huge window, beyond which, in the dark, planes were taxiing, landing, or allowing passengers to embark. No, said Vade to himself. He'd had enough of executive lounge hipsters, trust fund kids with their rising inflections and their perfect skin. He looked younger than he was. People talked to him. Don't look, he thought. She lifted thin arms to coil her hair and speared it with what seemed to be a single blue chopstick. Vade saw some armpit fuzz and wasn't put off. He felt a pain in his navel. He stared at her cheekbone and one long, slightly upward slanting eye. She looked round, smiled at him amicably, and sipped her drink. She wasn't going to talk to him. He was going to have to talk to her. He'd just begun to contemplate this when he heard some idiot blurt, "Where are you travelling to?" It was him. She looked up, glass in hand. "Where are you going?" he said, and smiled. She was looking at him. He wanted to die. "I'm flying to Bombay," she said. Her voice was clear and light. "So am I," he said. 9 o'clock? She nodded. "Are you studying? Is that where you live?" "Bombay, Mumbai," he went on, desperately. She remained calm and open. "Do you live in Mumbai?" "No, I'm going back to Assam. But first I'm spending a few days in Bombay to catch up with friends." "You live in Assam?" "I'm sorry," he stopped himself. "I'm interrupting your drink. My name's Vade." He pulled himself together and put out his hand, went back to the old approach, boyish, frank, etc. "Keteki," she said, not taking the hand, but smiling, less from pleasure, he noted, than as a gesture, a glass of cool water given to a guest. "That's a beautiful name," Vade said. "What does it mean?" "It's the name of a bird," she said. Vade smiled, looked at her full mouth. "It must be a beautiful bird." "Not especially, but it's a trickster." "A what?" "A trickster. It leaves its babies in other people's nests to bring up, and it looks and tries to sound like a bird of prey so other birds leave it alone." "Oh," Vade said. She had a few white hairs that did decorative things near her ear. Her eyeliner had made a blob near the inner corner of her eye. He had never before realized how appealing any of these things was. Armpit fuzz, smudged eyeliner, white hairs. Secretly, for years, he must have been infatuated with them all. "But the Keteki bird has a sweet voice." She smiled again. "Excuse me, I just want to go and, before we board." "Oh, that won't be for a... Do you want me to keep an eye on your stuff?" "Sweet of you." She smiled at him, and glowing, he guarded her plate, bags, magazine, and champagne fruit. "Oh, look," Keteki said, "they've written your name twice." Vade, said the piece of paper the driver was holding. Vade wiped his face. No," he said. "That's my name." "They're not actually the same name," he said when they were in the car. "Can you put the air conditioning on, please?" "Excuse me?" In better Hindi, she asked the driver to put on the air conditioning. He laughed and said it was on. They swung under a flyover. "But they're spelt the same and they sound the same," Keteki said. "One means a doctor," Vade said. "The other means knowledge." "Isn't it the same etymology?" she said. Knowledge. Clever, like you say in England." In his suite at 11 in the morning, Vade sipped a gin and tonic and looked across the Arabian Sea, which was dirty. What a coincidence. So was he. Very soon he'd do something about that. The bathroom here was nice. He would avail of it, as Indians say, in no time at all. He wished he could avail of Keteki. A remark she'd made in the car as he was dropping her off at her friend's house, where, somewhere after the sea link, had stayed with him. "Venture capital," she said. "Okay, so you're going to meet this man who wants to reboot his light bulb company, with the bulb that lasts a long time. Good name, by the way. But Vade, what do you do for joy?" "For..." said Vade. "Joy," she repeated, in that clear voice. Long fingers pushed back her hair. Now the air conditioning was definitely on. Vade could smell himself, and he'd smelled better. "You mean fun?" Vade said. "No, joy. What makes you feel joyful? Like a child?" He'd looked in her eyes, a lighter brown than his, a trace of eyeliner under them like smoke. He said. In the last few years, Vade had more or less given up on having girlfriends. He'd started having sex with women and being slightly dismissive before he left or got them to leave. Just a callous remark, a joke, something that implied he didn't quite remember who they were, or didn't think all that highly of them. He wasn't sure why he was doing it, and when he noticed, he'd compensate by being nicer before he fled. In some peculiar way, the more he might have liked the girl, whoever she was, the more he felt relief after the final moment of being a shit, almost more than after sex. He'd feel unburdened and take a long shower, wander around his house in fresh, soft cotton clothes. At 4:30 he went downstairs, feeling calm and cool. He had on a clean suit, a new shirt. He carried nothing except his phone and the folder. Ganesh Appaya was waiting in the sea lounge. "Vade," said Vade, shaking Ganesh's hand. He noticed the other man was very still. "Hi, Vade," said Ganesh. "Hi, what'll you have?" Ganesh had a table with a sea view. They ordered tea. Vade felt more relaxed than he had in a long time. Usually he drank coffee and talked fast. Here he was with tea and waiters in absurd white uniforms with turbans and air conditioning, and outside was the soothingly brown sea. "I like it here," Vade said. Ganesh smiled. Everyone, Vade noticed, was treating him as though he was a child, and he didn't mind at all. "My parents are from India," Vade said, "or were." Ganesh smiled again. "Tea," thought Vade, sipping his cup of Assam. It smelled fragrant, of fermentation, sweat, armpits, reality. It was growing on him. This place was having an odd effect, a bouquet of small assaults on his emotions. He felt buoyant, but reminded himself to stay in control. "I've had a look at the documentation," he said. "The product looks very interesting. It's not exactly a CFL, it's not an incandescent, it's not an LED. What are you terming it?" Vade got distracted by a shortcakey biscuit and ate it. He heard Keteki's clear voice. "Filament is a lovely word." "We haven't come up with a generic name yet," Ganesh said. "You have the literature, and our engineer will explain it further. He's the best person to do that. But we're calling it an intelligent filament. It learns to shine and hold its radiance the more it's used. We're reviving the Lucifer brand. This one's called the Everlasting Lucifer, as you've seen." Vade laughed. "Yes, about that. I wonder if that's going to be a problem in Europe." "I don't know," Ganesh said. "Originally Lucifer means the morning star, the bringer of light. My grandfather ran the firm when it was still British-owned, and I remember he told me that Lucifer is a Latin word, used in the Bible for Jesus, too. Have you seen the old ads?" "Yes." Vade opened the folder to colour reproductions, a cute devil assisting a small child to study in the evening. Lucifer brand, let there be light. The next day, Vade would visit the office with Ganesh. "I wanted you to come home for dinner today, Vade, but my wife's out, and I thought you'll just have reached, you'll be tired. Do you have plans, though?" Vade waved a hand. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm supposed to meet someone this evening." In the lift, Vade wondered if part of the reason he'd agreed to the strip was so that he could visit Rupal Madam. As he aged, he noticed himself becoming both more brutal and more sentimental. The idea of falling in love seemed absurd when applied to him. Occasionally he saw a couple somewhere and felt an ache. Most recently, he'd felt it, he thought, when Keteki Sharma had raised her thin arms to put up her hair in the airport. But he had systems for managing his life. He missed his childhood, or sometimes thought he did, though it was preferable not to think about his parents. Why upset himself? But the feeling of being a child, being loved, indulged, safe, a feeling he rarely remembered having when actually a child, still pulled him. In India, a place he'd spent a few early, barely remembered years, the feeling became general, floating. Here, people were in and out of their childhood, no matter their age. Anyway, it was silly not to do more work here. Growth was still good, and the new Hindu nationalist government seemed business-focused. Everyone spoke English. What was his problem? The process of getting a date with Rupal Madam had been streamlined. There should be an app for it. He'd called the old cell phone number as soon as he'd agreed to this job, and instead he'd been told to email her assistant. He'd been sent a confirmation and order number, a list of preferences to update, and a secure form for payment. Adding the title, Luxury Consultant, to her name and address was a nice touch. Presumably that was so that even if one got one's secretary to make the booking, there was no awkwardness. "You're nemogenic," he'd said to Keteki before she got out of the car the previous night. "I really hope we see each other again." She nodded. "You've read your Nabokov, huh?" Now, as the lift approached the 17th floor, Vade felt himself getting half a hard-on. The flat had been redecorated. It was light and airy, not a world away from his hotel suite. The sofa was upholstered in raw silk. A large golden Buddha sat against one wall. "So you're back, beta?" At the sound of Rupal Madam, Vade's hard-on became emphatic. Her voice was grating, insistent, her accent slightly off when she spoke English. He turned. Her eyes flashed anger. "I never thought I'd see someone from this family in service, in a job, working for other people. And what is it you think you do? You think the world owes you a living. When your father gets home, he will speak to you. But first, I will explain. Bend over." Gratefully, aware from the corner of one eye of the Buddha's golden gleam, he undid his flies and bent over the table. He heard her approach and knew she was holding a hairbrush, large, wooden, paddled, as specified on the form. That's the end of episode 1. Thank you for listening. I'll be posting episode 2 tomorrow.